Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. They offer free checking with industry-leading mobile banking. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? Happy Wednesday morning. Well, for the first time in quite a while, we come to you with actual breaking news here on the TSL set. Brand new women's basketball coach was just hired here in Blacksburg. We've got the whole crew to tell you all about it. It's coming up on episode 357 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. Welcome back in, Hokies fans, as we record on Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024, from our studio at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content as well. David with a brand new story up there on the new hire, and as always, the first month of your subscriptions is free. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. Across the way, our managing editor, David Cunningham. In the fourth chair, senior staff writer, Mr. Andy Bitter, and producing behind the scenes, Jay Brizzy, Jack Brizendine, as always. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, but we're also sponsored by the Hokie Way. The first ever Hokie Way auction is live now through April 15th, allowing Hokie fans from around the world to bid on exclusive items and experiences like vacation packages and experiences with Brent Pry, Bud Foster, and so on. The auction will run from noon on Monday, April 1st until noon on Monday, April 15th. Visit thehokieway.org to learn more and to bid. And I will say, Will had me check it out. There is some really cool experiences in there, so I encourage you all to go ahead and do that. Well, we got breaking news. Brand new women's basketball coach has been hired. Megan Duffy, she comes from Marquette, was at Marquette, the head of that program over in the Big East, a Power 6 hire here, if you will. She was there from 2019 to 2024, and I'll pass it along to David with our breaking news here.
Yeah, we're coming on at right before noon on Wednesday. The hire was made at announced 11:20. So this is all fresh. People were getting a little antsy. I think that's probably the right way to describe it. It's been a tumultuous, kind of an up and down week for Virginia Tech men's and women's basketball. Obviously, Kenny Brooks left on Tuesday of last week. We have not done a podcast since, and I'm sure we'll get into a bunch of the other stuff later. But people were getting antsy on the boards about, is Whit Babcock just sitting on his couch twiddling his thumbs? It's like, no, he's out interviewing candidates and hiring a very good women's basketball coach. And he did. Megan Duffy is the new coach at Virginia Tech. She comes from Marquette, where she spent 5 seasons. She won 20-plus games in 4 of the 5 years. The other one was the COVID-shortened season in 2020-21, and she won 19. She took Marquette to 3 NCAA tournaments. She's a really good coach. She worked at Miami of Ohio and won 20-plus games in each of those 2 seasons before going to Marquette. She's from about Kettering, Ohio, which is just right outside of Dayton, and she played at Notre Dame. She's been an assistant a bunch of different places, St. John's, where she was there under Kim Barnes-Araiko, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and they went to the NCAA tournament a handful of times. Then she was at George Washington, so there are some of your regional ties. And then she was at Michigan, and she's won everywhere she's been. I created a list on Saturday of, here are 30 coaches I legit thought could be potential candidates. And 6 of them were, as Gio said, Power 6, including the Big East. And Duffy was one of them. And I've always admired Duffy. Tech played Marquette back in 2021. That first season after COVID in the NCAA tournament. She's a really, really good coach. She develops players. She's had 5 or 6 first-team All-Big East selections in her 5 years at Marquette. And Virginia Tech's getting a really, really good coach who, as I put in my story from the Virginia Tech release, this is a dream job for her. And, I know coaches just throw those things out there and say that, but I think she's going to do really, really good things in Blacksburg. And, people were, I think, a little worried that Whit Babcock might hire a mid-major coach, and he's done that before. But be pleased. Whit Babcock went out and got maybe one of the most sought-after, P6 coaches that he could have gotten. I know, like, Miami is another opening, and Miami was rumored to be looking at Duffy. So Virginia Tech got a good one.
Yeah, I mean, you should always ignore the media reports when it's Whit Babcock hiring basketball coaches. Like, remember the last time the men's job was open, you had a report from the Washington Post saying that Ryan Odom had been hired and was the guy. You saw other reports by national writers saying that the Seton Hall coach was going to be the guy. So, like, Whit will, I think, throw leaks out there, false leads, to throw people off his real targets during coaching search during the whole process. And I think he's very savvy at that. And so you kind of have to ignore most of the names you hear during a Virginia Tech coaching search because of how his style of hiring coaches. I will say this, every basketball coach he's hired so far, Buzz Williams took Virginia Tech to three straight NCAA tournaments, which had never been done before. A Sweet 16, which had never been done before. Kenny Brooks took Virginia Tech to a Final Four, which had never been done before. Mike Young took Virginia Tech to back-to-back NCAA tournaments and won an ACC title, which has never been done before. Whit Babcock knows how to hire basketball coaches. Kenny Brooks has a career .717 winning percentage. Megan Duffy has a career .705 winning percentage. Yeah, if you didn't think this was going to be a good hire, then you don't know Whit.
Fair enough. I want to ask you guys, Kenny had mentioned before his departure that he wasn't looking. So how is it different? Whit has been rumored to always keep a list in his desk type of a thing. When you just kind of have this thrown at you and all of a sudden everything happens so fast in the modern era of sports, and you go from feeling completely content like you have a Final Four team to looking for a new head coach in a week span?
Yeah, I think this was from... And Andy can probably chime in on this too, because he was also on the media call last Wednesday, a week ago today, with Whit. And the way it came off to me was Whit did not exactly expect this to happen. He was kind of, I think in this business you can't always be 100% sure, but I think he was kind of leaning towards he expected Kenny Brooks to stay. And it obviously did not trend that way. Tuesday morning, the news comes out that Kenny Brooks is leaving. Well, 8 days later, Whit Babcock as basketball coach. Now, this is the fourth basketball coach he's hired, 2 from Marquette now. But with all of the other ones, when he hired Buzz Williams to replace James Johnson, when he hired Kenny Brooks to replace Dennis Wolf, when he hired Mike Young to replace Buzz Williams, all of those took like a week or less. This took 8 days, and I think you could say that the other ones kind of, the writing was a little bit on the wall before those things happened. And I think this one was kind of maybe the most surprising out of the blue. But, I think fans just like to, yell and scream at clouds. And, it's like Whit. I had heard that Whit was talking to people and interviewing over the weekend, and that's what you do as an athletic director. And like you said, he always keeps it close to the vest, and, for him to come away with this hire, I think there are a lot of really good mid-major coaches out there, but I think hiring a proven P6 coach who every single season she was at Marquette, the team finished in the top 5 in the Big East. Now, this is not the ACC where you got 8 or 9 teams going to the NCAA tournament, but it does have UConn, and she had 2 second-place finishes early in her career at Marquette, so she can win.
Andy, are you disappointed and surprised at all by, because again, last time we got on here and talked for a podcast, it was, is Kenny Brooks going to leave? And so much has happened in the last week since then. Are you disappointed or surprised at all in Virginia Tech's reaction as a fan base to Kenny Brooks leaving for Kentucky?
No, I'm not either of those. I don't really have expectations of it. I feel like Tech fans kind of got duped. They fell for this is home. This is my dream job. She's already saying it coming in here. Let me tell you right now, your dream job's the job you currently have, and you play it up like that. I've covered college athletics enough for 20 plus years now that I have seen and heard this song and dance before, where this is home, this family, this is the perfect place, this is where I want to be. You are where you are at. That you talk up your current job, and when a better opportunity comes along, like Kenny Brooks in Kentucky, sorry to say, it's a better opportunity in terms of money, resources, opportunity. You have to kind of feel like you would max things out at Virginia Tech with the 2 All-Americans they have, one of which was for sure leaving, one of which is leaving now, maybe to Kentucky. We'll see how that goes with Georgia Amore coming up. I think just a lot of fans, I don't want to say fell for it, but they just bought too much into that kind of line of talking. That's just how coaches talk. They say that about where they're at. So I never really believed the Kenny Brooks, this is where I'm going to be forever, this is where I'm going to retire. I don't know if he ever said that. And maybe that was the sentiment people got out of this because, as I mentioned to you before this, I'm a jaded, literally bitter old sports writer here that has seen this thing before. Like, okay, I've heard the coach speak before, but you can read between the lines on this stuff. And, when the report comes out that Kenny had interviewed with them, you interview for a job right before the NCAA tournament tells me that you're serious about that job. You can say I wasn't looking for anywhere, but I don't know. You see the interview happen like that. It kind of seems like you were looking for somewhere if you were interested in taking the interview. The way Kenny responded to the question about whether he had interviewed at Kentucky, where he's like, I don't even know what an interview is. I don't even have Twitter anymore. It's like, okay, that's not exactly a denial in this whole thing. And then you step back and look at the situation rationally and go, SEC school with SEC resources, money. I know people are like, Virginia Tech was going to offer more. It's like, okay, well, if you offer more after somebody had already offered you that money, it doesn't exactly look great for you. I left for another job one time, and I told my employer about it. They go, okay, what can we do to keep you? It's like, okay, well, what did you do the previous 4 years to keep me here? So that sort of situation pops up like that. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by this. I don't think Hokies fans should get as upset about a coach leaving. This is a business, and a coach leaving for somewhere else is going to happen, and it's going to happen again. And I just say, I think, we were talking about this one last point here beforehand, is I think they kind of got spoiled with Frank Beamer. And, when you say, I'm going to be here, this is the dream job. He spent 30 years here. Bud Foster here was here for what, 34, 35? I forget what the final number was. I mean, that is unusual for these coaches to stay here this long. So I feel like the expectation is that all coaches are going to be like that, when in fact, that's not the case. Most of them will get fired or move on to another job at some point in their life. Frank Beamer moved on to another job for, 12 hours. I mean, he basically accepted that North Carolina job. I think he did, and then changed his mind and stayed here. So this is a business. Coaches make business decisions, and, that's the decision Kenny made.
Were you guys at all disappointed in a way, maybe by the fan base reaction?
I wouldn't say I'm disappointed. I do think, as Andy said, this fan base is a little more susceptible to stuff like that because of Frank Beamer and to a lesser extent Bud Foster. Those guys not only won a lot of games and made that impact on the fan base and the university, but they've really had a direct impact on how Virginia Tech fans think, for better or for worse. And I think that will slowly fade over time as the Beamer era gets further and further into the rearview mirror.
And hey, Bud was talking to Texas A&M very seriously there at the end that one time. Yeah. That was the most serious it got. So there are always suitors for these things.
There always are, So, but those guys, because that happened, and then, I think that impacts how the fan base thinks through the years and what they expect of their coaches. And I don't think that's fair necessarily to the coaches. I wouldn't want to be held to that standard. But at any rate, I think as time goes by and you lose more coaches and you're just used to more turnover with personnel, with the transfer portal and things like that, I think eventually it won't be so bad. But, it was still, I guess a decade ago when Frank Beamer was still coaching here, right? So it hasn't been that long. That era is not far in the rearview mirror,
and this was really the first coach that left in this free transfer portal era.
Yes.
I think even when Mike Young was hired, they still had the sit-out rule at that point. Didn't Aluma have to sit out for a year when he came here? So now, it's basically like free agency all the time. You leave, the player can go with you. And, Virginia Tech fans will lament that when it's Kenny Brooks taking players with him to Kentucky. They will cheer that on if it's, Megan Duffy bringing players with her from Marquette. And there's a pretty good player in the transfer portal right now that I'm sure Hokies fans would love to have on their roster. So this is the give and take of coaches coming and going. And, until there's changes in the structure of the NCAA and they actually admit that these players are employees and sign them to contracts, I'm not really going to complain about it.
Well, this goes back to when Tom Brands was Virginia Tech's wrestling coach, and this was before Virginia Tech wrestling was good. It's just like Tech randomly hired an elite wrestler, a guy who was a huge name in the industry, and you're like, wow, that happened, and then all of a sudden Tech signed like a top 5 or 10 recruiting class, and those guys came in for 1 year, and a lot of them redshirted, and then he immediately left and went to Iowa, I think it was Iowa, and then they all left with him, or they all tried to leave with him, and like I actually think there was a lawsuit, like a Jim Weaver versus these players, and did they have a right to transfer without sitting out a year and things like that. I mean, so this goes back over a decade to Tech. Now that was one of the very, very early things in college sports where basically a whole team transferred because of one coach. But it's not new from that standpoint, but it's going to happen more and more. And guess what? I'm going to guess that at least one Marquette player and at least one player from their recruiting class plays for Virginia Tech next year. Just like a bunch of Wofford players helped Virginia Tech win the ACC title in basketball. It goes both ways. I think that's just a natural part of it these days. You have these relationships with people, and also, and you don't know who your next coach is going to be, and things like that. I mean, Kenny Brooks was a great recruiter. He was a great recruiter partially because he was a great relationship builder, and you see all those players talk about, like Georgia Moore called him her American dad or second dad or something like that.
What was Kenny talking about? Claire Strack, these are my babies.
Right.
That's sort of the relationships that's there. So you can see why, I know Strack has not announced a destination after going to the portal, but it would make a lot of sense if you would follow the coach that you recruited that you think so highly.
Yeah, absolutely. When Buzz Williams came to Virginia Tech, who did he bring? Ahmed Hill, who had already signed with Marquette, right? I mean, it's normal. It's just part of the game these days.
Yeah, and you complain about it when it happens to you, and you love it when it happens for you. That's it. Yeah, it's literally just how it goes.
But what's that reaping sowing tweet that's out there?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right?
Can't we just be upset for a minute?
And I think the other thing is like the men's basketball stuff, like the men's basketball exodus, which I'm sure we'll get into. Like that doesn't help things because you go from having this team that was 10-10 in the ACC, and then the entire starting 5 is gone in a flash, and it's like, where in the world did this go? But as far as Duffy and Kenny Brooks, and I think from people I've talked with, I think the fan base reaction kind of contributed to the way Kenny Brooks didn't say anything to Tech fans when he left. Because, and not that is right or wrong, but Tech fans kind of jumped on him immediately. And I know that's just kind of how it is. But as I think from his perspective, why would I say anything to the fans if they're just going to turn like that on a dime? Now, I get from the fans' perspective, it's, well, you said you wanted, you said all this family stuff. You're preaching about family, and then you're just going to get up and walk away. Now,
totally reasonable reaction, by the way. If you're a fan of the team, you're allowed to be hurt about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's short for fanatic.
Yeah.
Right? No, and I think the people pull. I'm just trying to provide perspective into Kenny and why he maybe didn't say anything. But yeah, no, I think the silliest people out there are the ones that are trying to police everything and tell people how they should or shouldn't feel. You're fans, feel however you want. But now what I do feel a little bit bad about is, I saw some people attacking Georgia Amore for announcing that she's entering the portal, and she's likely going to end up at Kentucky. She and Strack both have do not contact tags on them, which means that they have to initiate stuff with the school. Well, they both, like Andy said, they they both have this great relationship with Kenny. Where do you think they're going to go? And I get fans would be upset, but what is the line? Don't be upset that it's over. Smile because smile because it's happened.
No, here's the thing. Like, I've sat on this podcast before and advocated. We talked about Kitley getting her jersey retired or whatever, and I've sat here and advocated for Georgia getting her jersey retired because I think she's the second best player in school history. And for most players, it's not where they finish for how they're remembered. It's where they end.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you mean that's not where it started? Well, not when they started.
Right.
Russell Wilson, Wisconsin
exactly
quarterback.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So, like, when Georgia Amore gets drafted next year and they announce her name at the podium, it's going to say from the University of Kentucky, point guard Georgia Amore.
Likely, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's just the way it is, and so her jersey's now unretirable.
Yeah.
Is it?
To me, maybe not,
I don't
but
know.
it's a little bit.
I see a lot of these people out there. It's like they've just taken their legacy and burned it to the ground. It's like, take a breath. You're gonna look back at this 5 years from now. This was the most enjoyable stretch of women's basketball at Virginia Tech ever. Like, enjoy that fact. Kitley and Amore and Kenny Brooks were a huge part of it. But everything ends, and you always move on to the next generation. It was going to end in one more year anyway for Amore. It doesn't undo the things that she accomplished in her first couple years here. It doesn't undo.
I agree.
Sting, though.
I agree, but it still won't happen.
Maybe. This is a new era where star players will leave and go somewhere else and accomplish other things. Early 2000s, you think of it one way. Now with the freedom of movement for players, I mean, some players play at a new school every single year.
Oh, wait till we talk about
the
Tech's men's basketball.
Right, exactly. I just think that it might feel that like there's a stigma now, but I think you get removed from it. 5-10 years from now, you look at it and go, that's just sort of what college sports was in that era.
Yeah, I don't think people are used to kids I don't think Virginia Tech fans are used to kids transferring every single year yet. I mean, that hasn't.
Every year.
You know what I mean? That hasn't.
Nobody's fans are.
Yeah, but like
across the country, it's not just specific to Virginia Tech.
Yeah,
it's still a weird feeling to see. Brand new team this year, and
One of my favorite follows on Twitter is Message Board Geniuses, which, by the way, TSL finally made last week during the women's basketball.
Really,
coach
I missed
search.
it.
Oh yeah,
was it just
great.
a meltdown?
I think that.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was from our free boards.
I'll find it. Yeah.
Goals accomplished. But anyway, yes, fans in general, every fan base's fans say the same things to a certain extent. I think some are a little more extreme than other fan bases, but all the feelings are the same. Everybody else is like, we do everything the right way. Everybody else's coach is dirty. That's how all fans are generally.
Wow, it's like everybody thinks.
Yeah. Our coach loves our school.
Yeah.
They'd never leave. And yeah.
I think last point on women's hoops, the difference is you mentioned that Tech, because of Beamer and Foster, kind of falls in love with things in a different way. I think the other thing is it's been credited since the beginning that getting them to that height is filling Castle Coliseum and these sellouts and bringing women's basketball to a level it was never at and giving it the attention that it never had here. And then it's like he just walks away from it and doesn't say goodbye. I think that's where people being upset was, because it's like, you made us such a big part of building it, and now it just felt like a cold shoulder type of thing is how people are feeling.
I think sometimes it's better to leave without saying anything.
What can he say that was going to make fans satisfied?
Little Irish goodbye action.
There's nothing that he could have written.
He's just like leaving like Chris Coleman at Champs on a Saturday night, just walking out the door and I'll be back eventually.
Anything you would have put on Twitter it just would have been a dumpster fire from the start of it. So if you're in his case, like, what's the upside? Why do it?
Can we talk about just the Tech roster real quick?
Absolutely.
So I think just to provide some perspective. So there are 3 Tech players in the portal. Samaya Suffren entered basically right after Tech's last game, not tied to Kenny Brooks, really. Georgia Amore and Claire Stracker, and I expect both of them to, from everything I've heard, they're both following Kenny Brooks to Kentucky, even though, especially in Claire Strack's case, Tech has made big pushes in the NIL space to try to get her to stay. That leaves Matilda Eck, Rose Mishaw, Carly Wenzel, Mackenzie Nelson, and Karis Baker, I believe. I would not be surprised if they stay. And or at least, now that Megan Duffy's been hired as a head coach, stay and at least hear out the new coach before making a decision. But I believe that they haven't, if they were going to essentially follow Kenny Brooks to Kentucky, I think they would have entered already. But like Andy said, I'm sure Duffy will probably bring some players over from Marquette, maybe some pieces of the recruiting class. I would expect, in my opinion, Clara Silva and Lexi Blue, the top two pieces of Tech's recruiting class, to follow Kenny Brooks to Kentucky. But I think Tech is in an okay spot. And again, this is the era of the transfer portal. This is the first time Tech has gone through a rebuild in basketball. Obviously, Brent Pry had the transfer portal to use when he was hired with the transfer portal. Meaning, when Mike Young was hired, Hunter Couture was the one kid that really followed him, but he was a recruit. Mm-hmm. Then Keve Aluma came, and then Storm Murphy eventually came as a grad transfer. But this is going to be a little bit different. And people are freaking out about what players is Virginia Tech going to get. Well, there are almost 1,000 kids in the transfer portal. There are plenty of kids to choose from, but there's and her name is escaping me. The best player at Marquette this year was Lisa Carlin. She averaged 17.7 points and 7.9 rebounds per game. And like Andy mentioned, she's in the transfer portal right now. So that's a name for Virginia Tech fans to keep an eye on. But yeah, this is the start of a new era at Virginia Tech. And I'm curious. I'm sure the fan base, after a rough week will kind of surround her. It'll be all positive from here on out.
Last question for you guys. This is something that I was talking about over the weekend. There were some people that were like, no way Georgia Amore is going to go to Kentucky. This is before she entered the portal, right? No way she's going to Kentucky, this, and that. The starting salary in the WNBA for a pick 1 through 4, $78,000. Pick 5 through 8, $75,000. The remaining picks in the first round, $72,000, and then in the second round, $69,000. That's really not a lot, right? So my question for you guys is, what are the rules? Because the point I made was, hey, she goes to Kentucky, she can make way more in NIL than what her salary would be in the WNBA, but she's from Australia, so she can't make NIL money.
So they'll go play. Over Thanksgiving, they'll go play in the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands or Jamaica, or they'll go or she'll go home to Australia, or they'll go to Greece.
So she can receive NIL money.
Yeah, when she's out of the country.
Right.
So they'll just go out of the country. It's an easy workaround. She did the same thing last year. She went back home to Australia last summer, and a lot of her NIL stuff came out then. When she went to Greece, when they went to the Cayman Islands, she's out of the country. She's eligible. Yeah. So, it's not really surprising. And,
going to the Cayman Islands to receive a money payout is a little too on the nose.
And people, I think a lot of people will look at that situation and go, why would they follow Kenny Brooks if nothing is built there? Because of the relationship. It all comes down to relationship in this business. You see it all the time. It doesn't matter. It's like, for instance, if for some reason Will and Chris were to leave, and then they're like, hey, David, you want to come follow us to this? It's like, I've worked with them before. I know what working with them is going to be like. I know they're great people. If it's a great opportunity, why would I not? Right? It doesn't matter what we built or haven't built. And that's...
You guys going to rebuild the Sabre and cover UVA or something?
But my point is that, there's nothing built at Kentucky. But in this era of the transfer portal, with the backing that Kentucky has and the resources, we're talking about they just renovated Memorial Coliseum, I believe it is, for $82 million. And meanwhile, Virginia Tech, it was supposed to be a $70 million renovation for Castle, and Tech hadn't been able to pony up the money for that.
Yeah.
Now I'm just that's just a simple comparison. That money is real. That those resources are real. And if Kenny Brooks wants to compete at the highest level, year after year, with the right backing, Kentucky's a better opportunity to do that. And the salary isn't a huge difference, but it's the resources that come with it. And Amari Berry, this is random, but Amari Berry, who is committed to Clemson, top 10, 15 recruit in the country, McDonald's All-American, she's taking a visit to Kentucky this week. She decommitted when Amanda Butler was fired at Kentucky, or at Clemson, and then now she's taking a a visit to Kentucky. And like Kenny Brooks is going to be able to recruit on a little bit on a higher level. His ceiling is going to be a little bit higher when he's in the SEC. But for those people asking, why is Georgia Amor, why is Clara Strack interested in following him? It's the relationships, because they know what they're going to get from him, right? Georgia Amor would not, she admitted this, I would not be the player I am without him. And same goes for Clara Strack, who would have been a really, really good player for Virginia Tech this year if she wasn't sitting behind Elizabeth Kitley. So, I mean, the head coaches are the ones that are building the connections with them. And it stinks for the fans because you build relationships with somebody like Georgia for 4 years, and then she goes to another school. But as Chris said, 'tis sports. That's just kind of the way it is.
Well, it was. I saw this during the NCAA men's tournament. They had like a tweet that showed the starting fives from all the Elite Eight teams, and where they came from, basically. And I think NC State, wasn't it all five? All five of their starters. And that's just basketball these days. And so a roster situation, you go, oh, Kentucky, they were terrible last year. A roster situation is fleeting. You can turn that around very quickly, and
especially in hoops.
Yeah, I mean, you need a couple of impact players. You don't need 30 like you do in football. That's like moving a barge. You got to get momentum going and eventually start to turn things around. Basketball can happen like that. And honestly, it'd be a dereliction of duty for these head coaches not to, pursue players that are available to them, that they know their skill set, they have relationships with. And that's Kenny Brooks' situation. That's Duffy's situation coming from Marquette. I mean, they're being paid to win basketball games. And that's the best way to rebuild your rosters, to go after people
I can't blame either of them, but especially Clara Strack. You played 1 year here. Doesn't have the same heartfelt connect. If Georgia wanted to hang him up, fine, but like with Clara Strack, you played 1 year here. Doesn't have the same heartfelt connection. Yeah. She didn't go to a Final Four here, and
she's from Buffalo.
Yes, yeah. She's connected to her teammates in Kenny Brooks, not necessarily Virginia Tech.
You came here because Bill Roth recruited you to come here, right? You didn't just start researching, oh, I think I'll go to Virginia Tech. The school looks amazing.
Right.
It is an amazing school, but you wouldn't have been exposed to it if Bill Roth didn't specifically recruit you. Right. So it's and you're from upstate New York.
If Bill Roth left for Syracuse, Gio would be like, finally this tattoo is going to pay off. I'm heading back home.
All right. Well, on that note, let's talk about all of the basketball players leaving on the men's side. Probably the craziest max exodus I've seen, that in any way it hits close to home anyways, without a coaching change, right? Mike Young's still here and everybody's out. Poteet entered the portal, decided after splashing around on the shallow end for a minute that he's going to come back. Tyler Nichols in the portal. Padula's in the portal. MJ Collins is in the portal. Lynn Kidd's been in the portal and already is going to Miami. And John Camden's in the portal.
Yeah. Lynn Kidd committed to Miami less than 48 hours after entering the portal. So I think we pretty much know what happened there. But that's not a criticism, because Jalen Lane committed to Virginia Tech less than 48 hours after hitting the transfer portal, right? That's just things that happen these days in sports. And it was more than I anticipated, but, I wrote about this last week. It's an opportunity. Like, it's an opportunity to get worse, but it's also an opportunity to get better, because, there are good players available, and you have to Virginia Tech does not have a very good men's basketball NIL budget. I've heard, bottom 3 or so in the ACC. So, and if most people knew that, they wouldn't be so quick to criticize Mike Young, because I think in any sport where you knew the payroll, if you got a middle of the pack finish with a bottom level payroll, that coach would be praised.
Right? You're not gonna be mad about the Oakland A's finishing dead last in the division every single year when they have the worst payroll in baseball.
Right. Well, imagine the Oakland A's finishing mid pack in their division.
Yeah, that's a W.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So I think it's difficult times because of that. I think there are some things Virginia Tech could do better as far as understanding market value and how they spend their NIL money, as far as they could get a little bit better at Moneyball, so to speak. But the thing that makes Moneyball made Moneyball successful for Billy Beane is that in baseball you have player control. You can do a really good job of scouting and drafting and acquiring players, but Major League Baseball rules is you get to keep them for 6 years, and you're not guaranteed to keep them more than a year in football. I mean, heck, actually, you see some guys these days transfer in and spend a spring practice, and then they're like, no, I'm out again. I didn't like it here, so I'm going to go to.
Yeah, nothing's binding people here.
Right.
I mean, you can go through spring and leave for some other school. Yeah. It happens.
Yeah, and these NIL deals they're not necessarily negotiated once a year. I mean, if you're a football player, and let's say you transfer in the summer or the previous winter, and then you go on and you have a good year, and you're getting recruited behind the scenes in the portal, you're going to have to get a raise. And then after spring practice, if you start getting pursued again, then you might have to have another raise. I mean, the NIL stuff is always fluid, and it's definitely the same thing for basketball. I will say I've learned probably more about NIL the last week that I ever really cared to know, especially in the basketball scene, but it's important to know. I don't want to get into most of it on a podcast because it's unfair to our subscribers who pay us money, but I've written a couple of articles about it in the last week, and I think it's a good read, and it'll increase your knowledge level as a fan. But, I think Virginia Tech has some work to do there, and I think they have a better understanding now, though, of what they have to do as far as an approach of. We've talked about this for football before. How much money do you dedicate to this position? How much money do you dedicate to that position? What's the market value of this guy and things like that? I don't think Virginia Tech has had a great understanding of that before in basketball, and I like to think they have a better understanding now.
Yeah, I think for basketball, you look at it and you go, man, what is going on there? This mass exodus. This was also a team that was like 10-10 in the ACC. Like, where they finish 8th place, 9th place,
8th, yeah,
whatever it was.
Yeah.
This was not a tournament.
8th out of 15.
It was not a tournament caliber team, and I think you looked at the construction of the roster, you're like, something's off. Just not enough of certain spots, and just not high enough caliber of play at certain spots. And perhaps this is an opportunity to reconstitute the lineup and bring some fresh guys into the team. Right now with what they have, which is not a lot because they're still pursuing a bunch of transfers, it's probably the last place team in the ACC. But you're going to add
Wake lost 6 players,
okay,
including several starters.
Then it could be a competition between the two.
This is
they're going to add 4 or 5 more players, right? You're going to fill out the roster with this whole thing, signing class as well. So this is not going to be the final situation. But I'm just saying, it's not like they lost all these players from a Final Four team last year. They lost it from a team that lost in the second round of the NIT. So there was work to be done on the roster to begin with.
All right, well, Tech did pick up a commit. You got a Jordan and a Curry all in one.
Probably never going to lose another game again. No.
Right. Jordan Ivy Curry commits to Virginia Tech from UTSA. Chris, I know you got an interesting story on him.
Yeah, well, he started out at UTSA, then he transferred to Pacific for 1 year, and then he transferred back to UTSA, and he's been committed to several other schools at various times in between. Maybe he's still committed to Virginia Tech a month from now. Maybe he's not, but let's say that he is. I think he's a good pickup. I think Chris Beard at Ole Miss seems to be the primary competition. I know he was scheduled to take a visit there. I don't know if he ended up visiting or not, but Chris Beard, obviously, I think if you've watched enough of his teams play, he prioritizes defense and really tough-minded players. And so if this was a guy he was recruiting, that should give you an idea of what type of player he is. He's a combo guard who right now would probably replace Hunter Couture in the starting lineup, and could also have some minutes at the 1, similar to like MJ Collins. So he could play with Brandon Recksteiner. He could play with whatever point guard Virginia Tech ends up bringing in, assuming they bring in one, which I think pretty much they have to. Or, in a pinch, he can run the point himself. So this is a guy who can fill multiple roles for Virginia Tech, average 17 points a game. He dropped 28 on Memphis this past year. I think he dropped 38 on FAU. And remember, FAU was a tournament team. They went to the final. I mean, Virginia Tech as a team dropped 50 on FAU, right? So I think he had 22 against Stanford. So this is a guy who's shown he can score against
ACC competition.
Correct,
now
ACC level competition, exactly, and an NCAA tournament caliber competition. So this is a very good get for Tech. Like I said, he's got a little bit of a sketchy background as far as commits that he's made and not stuck to, but assuming he sticks, then I really like where the portal entry phase of things is starting.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first of many. Virginia Tech has 7 scholarship players on its roster right now. You have 13 scholarships. You do the math. That's 6 open scholarships. Virginia Tech is going to get a lot more portal guys. He's a good player. He averaged like 17 points, and he's a very, very good scorer. I wrote this up yesterday when he committed. I forget how many double-figure games he had. He only played in 21, and I think he had 11 double-figure games, and 2 of them were 30-point games.
Yeah. Well, I think he had a 11 20-point game.
11 20-point games.
20-point games,
He only played in 21 games. He missed some at the beginning and some at the end because of injury. But yeah, I mean, this is a good pickup. And if you're a Virginia Tech men's basketball fan, this is what you want to see. Mike Young going out and getting guys who can score. And, it's going to be interesting to see how this guy, but also whoever comes after, how they integrate into the system that Mike Young runs. But that's what the preseason's for. And, I think looking ahead to this upcoming season, what's going to be the most interesting thing is how Mike Young schedules. We have not heard anything. I know Jim, I think this was, after the last time we did a podcast, The Athletic put out a story after talking with Jim Phillips that the ACC was considering going to an 18-game
Who's been talking about
schedule.
That for months
Yeah.
and months and months?
Chris has been telling him. He's been calling Jim Phillips.
We know they're playing Penn State and Baltimore.
Yes, we know they're playing Penn State and Baltimore, and they're playing in tournament in Florida.
Yeah.
It's escaping me.
Yeah, me too.
But I wrote about it. So, but the most interesting thing to me, first of all, Ivy Curry's a really, really good pickup. But when it comes to big picture, how coaches schedule going forward, how Mike Young schedules, because if he knows the one returning starting piece is Malijah Poteet, as of what we know right now, that means the majority of the rest of the rotation is going to be guys who have never played at Virginia Tech before. Mm. That means it could take a while to integrate everybody. So how do you schedule? Because, do you schedule easier so you win a lot of games at the beginning, gives guys time to find their footing? Because if you schedule too difficult, right, like Mike Young did this year where he knew most of what he had, right? You're going to be very interested to kind of just see how that whole non-conference process plays out, and it'll obviously come out more over the summer. But because it takes a while. Kenny Brooks talked about it all the time. You can't just plug and play guys. It's not like you just throw guys out on the court and they immediately know how to play really, really good basketball together. So, but Ivy Curry's a start. He's been a really, really good player. He had an uptick this past year in points, and he's. I want to say he shot 40% from the field, 39% from 3, and 80% from the line. So he's a good scorer, and he's exactly what Virginia Tech needs. And now the next challenge is continue to supplement guys around him.
Yeah, he has burned his UTSA legacy to the ground. Do you think that's what they're saying on the message board? The Roadrunners message board.
The Roadrunnersideline.com. Yeah, no question. In hindsight, I wish Tech had used their European trip this year instead of last year, because they're going to have so many new faces, and that gets you a couple extra weeks of practice time. At least, though, these days the NCAA has relaxed their summer practice rules. Like it used to be, coaches couldn't work with players until practice started, until officially the date practice started. And now all that's pushed up now. You can have individual workouts and some things before practice actually starts. And I think that helps these days, because there is so much turnover, and there are so many new players at every school every year, and they don't know the system yet, and they need a crash course, so to speak. So like spring practice for basketball, there is kind of like a summer period where you do get that instruction that prepares you for when actual practice begins in the fall, which you could kind of compare to spring practice for football. But at the same time, the rules are the same for everybody. And I think Virginia Tech has, again, depending on what happens in the portal, they could be worse. They could also be better, depending on how it goes. I mean, oh gosh, who's the school that was it? Auburn? That there's one school that literally lost like 9 players after last year, and then ended up in like the Elite 8.
Well, NC State.
NC State.
I mean, Alabama had four
Yeah.
starters
That's
from
right.
different schools.
That's right.
But one of the things that defines how well you can succeed in this era, I know we've talked about it, how can Mike Young adjust to the transfer portal era? I mean, you've seen it in the ACC alone. We've talked about this before, but in the last couple of years, you've seen guys like Jim Boeheim and Mike Bray get out of the game. Now they've been there for a long time, but like, it takes a special kind of dedicated person to want to keep up with the portal. You can't it's not an easy task. There are so many I forget. I think it was Jeff Goodman who tweeted that like when you take out the percentage of college basketball players at the D1 level this year who graduated, there's a good chance that almost half of the current college basketball players that were on rosters this year will be in the transfer portal. Those are so many names. But one of the things that allows you to do, if you have the right resources and if you can pitch your program the right way, is capitalize on it. And I look at a team like NC State, almost the exact opposite of Duke, who all 5 guys have never been anywhere else. Duke. NC State, all 5 guys have all been somewhere else. Right? DJ Burns, this is his 3rd school.
Yeah.
But everybody's fallen in love with him, and he's terrific. But like what Kevin Keats has done is acquired pieces from all over the place and brought it together. And it hadn't been a perfect season for NC State. And I don't know if that's like the right example to use, but what it does show is that you can achieve stuff. It just takes some time. And
it's a high wire act too. I mean, if you're bringing in all those new pieces all the time, it's tough to get them to play together.
Yeah.
So I mean, Keats was on the verge of being fired, and now he's the toast of the town, making the Final Four here. Like, if you're a coach, that's got to be nerve wracking. And you used to like that control of players, but continuity as well. So you can kind of build out a couple years ahead. Oh, this is a trouble spot here. Then you pursue a transfer. Now, it's anything goes, and your whole roster could be gone in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I think the worrying part is that like Mike Young said it to you. You were there at the Ohio State press conference after the game. How many more 5-year, 4-year players are we going to see at the same school? Hunter Couture, like that's why I think Hunter Couture was so unique in this era of college basketball. But yeah, that's why I don't think Kevin Keats is necessarily a great example, because he was almost fired. And he was right there, and now he has like an extension. He's going to the Final Four. So crazy story. But there are other coaches that have thrived, that have really, really succeeded in this era, both in the men's and women's game. And if you, again, have the right funding, that's what like NIL funding is so important now. But if you can be successful in the transfer portal, like that's just one piece of the puzzle. You have to figure out how you get these guys to play together. But like, this is just the start for Mike Young. And you talked about having the opportunity. This is an opportunity for Mike Young to kind of, in a way, rebuild his program from the ground up. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean like clean slate start over, but I mean more so like you had, for a period of time, 3 guys on the roster from this year, none of whom had ever started a game. In Patrick Wessler, Brandon Rexiner, and Jane Young. Obviously, Molijel Poteet is back. This is an opportunity for you to essentially get a little bit of a fresh start and build it how you want it. And I said this, I believe, when Carter Hill talked to me last week. I don't think Mike Young had necessarily prepared for the transfer portal, because when he was hired in 2019, it didn't exist yet. NIL didn't exist yet. He was hired, and like, you build your staff, you build your team one way. I think this is a good opportunity for him to reflect and then to capitalize on what he's learned, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll point out that football has a dedicated staff member to keep up and track and monitor the transfer portal all the time, and to understand the market and who's available and who's not going to be available. And I think it's a great opportunity with Ryan Nadeau departing the program as director of player personnel. That spot's going to have to be filled. I think somebody on that staff needs to be like an transfer portal expert, like the guy who keeps up with it, the guy who tracks it, the guy who understands market values and all the stuff you have to sift through behind the scenes in the portal recruiting game these days. I think that would be a really good hire for Virginia Tech right now in this day and age. and they have a spot open, and that's the type of person I would be targeting for that role if it was me.
Well, as always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Bank with First Bank and Trust Company. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead, turn it over to Mr. Bitter in the fourth chair, talking a little bit of Hokies football. How about those defensive tackles, Andy?
Yeah, we got to talk to all three of the new transfers on Tuesday. And first of all, very interview-savvy group. I think they're going to be guys that we request multiple times this year. I thought they were all excellent interviews. Just sort of interesting, all their backgrounds coming together at the same place, where, Aeneas Peebles goes to Duke. All ACC player, didn't even start a game last year. Looking for something different, transfers to Virginia Tech. Kamari Copeland, went to Army originally. He's a military brat. Went to Army originally, coming out of high school. Prep for a year. Went to Iowa Western Community College. He called Virginia Tech his dream school. I know I've been kind of making fun of that phrase here for a while, but it literally was for him. This was the place that he wanted to get to since he was in high school, and he gets the offer and comes here. Pretty impressive guy in the weight room. Then Kelvin Gilliam, the opposite end of the spectrum, where he went to Oklahoma. He was almost a top 100 guy, I think, initially. Looking for something else. He had some injury-riddled seasons at Oklahoma, looking to get out and find a place to play and coming back home. So, those three coming into that room, you added to Josh Fuga coming back. Wilfred Panay is back for another year. Coming out of last year, you look at losing Norrell Pollard, Phildarius Payne, Mario Kendricks, guys that have been here for a while and produced for a while. You look at the center of that defense, you go, man, that is a real hole there. And they plugged it up with these three guys. And I think it's going to be a rotation of those three and Fuga and possibly Panay, maybe a freshman, Handchuck or Emmett Laws coming in here right away, could get on the field as well. It's gone from a position that was the major question mark in December or whenever you're looking at the roster for next season to now I think it's pretty solidly filled.
Sweet. Anything to add on there, Chris, on the defensive line?
You go in there sometimes and players get interviewed and they answer the questions, but they don't really say anything. And by the end of it, you're just kind of like, well, I hope I got enough quotes to fill out an article or something. For those guys, yesterday, it was almost like, okay, slow down a little bit. You're selling us so much today.
Well, yeah, I packed all three into one. I probably could have written a separate story on each.
Exactly.
It might have been overkill in the spring to do a separate feature on each tackle. I just wanted to, kind of get the big picture of all three together. So I tried to get the highlights of what they said. But, man, there's a lot of interesting stuff that they went into.
I agree. And I think if I could choose a positional meeting room to be president these days in football, like if they invited me over and said, spend a week with the team with one position, which would you choose? I'd probably pick the defensive line room based on yesterday, just based on those personalities.
Just because how much they're weightlifting?
That would be actually
too.
fun to watch Kamari Copeland lift weights. That would be fun.
What was he? He said his single rep max for squat is probably over 700.
He said the most he's ever done was 675, but that was like a year ago. And since he can do 655 4 times now, that probably takes him to around the 710, 715 range for a one rep.
What was his
Have
bench?
you looked at that calculator, Chris?
And
His
bench
bench is
460.
460.
Right. So he didn't know that the Tech squat record was 755 pounds. He's like, I don't think I can get that.
Who's that? William Boatwright?
Boatwright, yeah, in like 91 or 2. But I don't know. He's got a year left. It's unlikely, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Now, I don't want him like straining himself,
Injuring himself to try to get
just
it.
to prove a point. He's already plenty strong. But that's a story I'll write at some point. Is about his weight room.
You
numbers.
don't need a Barkwell Rivers situation here. Wasn't he the one who like tore a quad doing the squats or something like that?
That would be brutal.
We
I think that's why they stopped doing the single rep maxes, right?
Probably. That reminds me of why I don't do squats very much.
I was showing my roommates the other day his squatting and his numbers and how he jumped in like a week. Remember he did 3 at like what did he do it at 35 or something?
635,
and then he
maybe,
did 55 for 4.
Yeah, and the thing is, he could have done more. If you want to get real critical about technique, he was bouncing a little bit in there, so he's wasting some motion and wasting some energies on the bouncing. He probably could have squeezed out another rep if you eliminate that bouncing.
If I have 650 pounds on my shoulders, I don't care what technique is going on. Like the fact that I'm not crumpling up into an accordion at that point would be a success. So lay off the man with the technique here. Come on.
Well, we looked up my roommate brought up this calculator and he's like, oh, you can look up your 1 rep max, whatever. And it said like 716.
Yeah.
Based off of that.
I looked at like 5 sites.
Okay.
Did that and got 5 slightly different numbers, so it depends on the formula you're using. But,
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say he could do 700 pounds.
Yeah, that'd be
Can you
pretty
imagine?
crazy.
Gosh.
No, you know what's crazy? The spring game is next weekend.
Yeah,
That's insane.
So what is that? 10 days from now?
Essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
That comes up quick.
we'll have how many more availabilities will we have? 1, Andy?
Friday and following Tuesday.
2.
I
Okay,
believe.
cool. And then spring game.
They're
We'll
already
actually
almost
get to
done with spring.
Media will actually get to see part of practice, like an extended part of practice.
What
on
day is that?
Friday?
Friday.
Oh, maybe I'll
When
have
it's
to.
freezing cold out, apparently.
Oh, it's been such perfect
Is that-
weather.
is
like
that-
70 degrees the last couple of days. Like those couldn't have been the open practices.
Is that in the
Come on
morning?
now. I believe so. I'd have to go look up.
So-
Oh yeah, so
Tech is
the high of 47 on Friday, but it means it'll be about 33 or 4 in the morning when we get to go to practice.
Well, just keep in mind, Tech Megan Duffy's introductory press conference is Friday morning at 9 a.m.
There we go.
You might be a solo.
We'll see.
Well, baseball won another series this past weekend. They have yet to lose a series all season. They're up to 11th in the country, according to D1 Baseball. Big one coming up this weekend, Wake Forest in town. Preseason number 1. They've been a little bit disappointing. Ranked 21st in the country, still a lot of talent there.
Still
Chris.
plenty of talent, and it's still baseball. Tech is 10-2 in the ACC. I forget what their ACC record was last year when they were a top 4 seed, but remember in 2013 when they hosted regionals, they went, I think, 16-14 in the ACC that year and got to host a first round. That's how tough the ACC is. They have not played the ACC's best so far, but still, that 10-2 record so far probably indicates that they'll end up hosting. That would be my guess right now. But barring just a collapse that has not happened since Freddie Gonzalez Braves blew a 10-game lead in September in 2011, or was it 2010? I don't remember. But they're going to the NCAA tournament. So from now, it's just what seed are you going to be and how many rounds can you host?
Softball was swept by number 2 Duke in Durham this past weekend. Tuesday doubleheader against Wofford was canceled. They'll play Liberty tonight, and then they're at NC State down in Raleigh this upcoming weekend. Before we let everyone go, what's coming up on TechSideline.com this week?
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's been an interesting 8 days because it's kind of keeping up with the portal and figuring out who the women's basketball coach is going to be. Now that we know, I actually have not even had time to really sit down and think about what I'm going to do. But we'll have more women's basketball content coming. We'll talk to Megan Duffy on Friday morning. So I'll have plenty from that. And Chris and I will keep you up to date on the men's basketball portal comings and goings. And I would expect that, I don't know if we'll see some more women's basketball players leave. We could, but I would expect maybe sometime in the near future we see some women's basketball additions, just because now she will have an opportunity to start building her roster. So
I'm going to try to write an article about what Mike Young's roster options are, how he could address certain positions and everything. But I tried to do that last week and got like 900 words into the article, and then 2 more Tech players hit the portal and it wiped everything else.
It's a moving target for sure.
Yes, exactly. So I don't want to start on it and then an hour later somebody commits and it ruins everything that I've written. So I've got to try to time that up right. But would like to get something out like that later this week, maybe on Thursday.
Sweet. How about you, Andy?
I got a mailbag Friday open practice for media. So I think we're talking. Hopefully, we're requesting Aiden Green and Mose Phillips. So we'll see if we get them. It'd be nice because I don't think we've spoken to either of those guys yet.
yeah.
Well, they were true freshmen last year, so they would have been off limits.
Yeah.
So.
We did get Dante Lovett at the bowl game, so they did loosen up a little bit at that point, but we didn't talk to either of these guys.
Yeah, and we'll have baseball and softball coverage as well. And I believe Jack Brizendine might have a story on Caleb Henson in the works on him winning his national championship.
Sweet.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for that.
Awesome. All right, I think that wraps things up for episode 357 of the Tech Sideline podcast. For Jack Brizendine, for Andy Bitter, for David Cunningham, for Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long from Blacksburg. We'll see you next week.